This is easy. That's obviously yes. You're smiling. Welcome back to On Deadline, the Washington Examiner's political game show. I'm Christian Datoc.
And I'm Tiana Lowe, Doescher.
Each episode, we give our takes on the week's biggest political stories, and then you vote on a winner at the end. Remember to like, subscribe, and tell all your friends too. This week, we're starting above the fold, where we each get a minute to talk about the biggest story on our plate. Tiana, what are you looking at today?
In Athens, Georgia, Jose Ibarra has been convicted of murdering Georgia native Laken Riley. Justice was served technically, but the real injustice was that Jose Ibarra ever had the opportunity to murder Laken Riley at all. Jose, a Venezuelan native with ties to Trinidad and Aragua, illegally crossed the U.S. border at the end of 2022, where federal authorities took him in custody and released him on parole. Then in New York City, he was arrested by NYPD for endangering a child, then released. He used a taxpayer-funded humanitarian flight to go down to Athens, Georgia. In Athens, he was arrested 1 month later at the end of 2023 for shoplifting. Then he was once again released. Then finally, a bench warrant was issued for his arrest in December. 2 months later, he murdered Laken Riley, hunting her down, attempting to rape her, and then asphyxiating her. That is the failure from the federal level to the state level of sanctuary policy, and Donald Trump must reverse it.
Tiana, the Laken Riley story was incredibly prescient over the last year or so. You had Joe Biden mispronouncing her name when asked to memorialize her murder.
Laken Riley, an innocent young woman who was killed by an illegal.
But my question to you is, do you think Republicans might have gone a little too far in propping up some of these individual cases, given how hard it will be for Donald Trump's deportation agenda to actually take place? He said he's going to get all these illegal immigrants out on day one, but there are still a lot of hoops to jump through.
I think starting with two things. One, the 1.3 million illegal aliens who've already received a deportation order. They have had their due process, and the judicial system under Joe Biden has said, you gotta go. Biden just hasn't enforced it. So take those 1.3 million. Then from there, we see these broken windows theories of illegal immigration. Start with the people that are arrested at a local level for theft. Start with the people who are arrested for endangering a child. Get rid of them. If your only crime is coming and illegally crossing the border, and since then you haven't been in local law enforcement, fine, you should be at the bottom of the list of priorities. I think everyone can agree with that. But Jose Ibarra was a known criminal, and Laken Riley's murder was preventable. Christian, what are you taking a look at this week?
Well, the gloves are off, the claws are out, and the first shots in the Democratic Civil War were fired in Washington.
Ooh.
On Wednesday, we had a symbolic vote to block arms transfers to Israel, but 18 Democratic senators and Bernie Sanders voted for it, even though the Biden White House was lobbying against this measure. And then at the DNC, the race to be the next chairman of the Democratic National Committee is heating up. You had establishment figures like Martin O'Malley, Ken Martin, who is a current DNC vice chair, and even Rahm Emanuel either actively getting in the race or saying they're thinking about running, but they're being opposed by Chuck Braca, who is a progressive strategist. He was Bernie Sanders' Latino whisperer back in 2020, and he worked on Ruben Gallego's winning campaign down in Arizona this cycle. Democrats don't have time to just sit at home and try and mope and cope and figure out this thing down the line. They need to institute change right now. Otherwise, they're going to lose the midterms and probably the 2028 general election.
I mean, I think you and I are both in agreement that Democratic voters deserve a better vehicle of a party mechanism than the current DNC leadership. Mm-hmm. But my question is the debate over should we be to the left or should we be to the ultra left missing the forest for the trees when the real issue is that party leadership spent 4 years lying to the American people about the state of Biden's mental health and then inserted Kamala Harris without a single primary vote? Is any conversation that doesn't start with that basic apology one that's going to be futile in regaining the trust of voters?
Well, Tiana, before you run, you have to start walking, right? And I think for Democrats, this is a good first step. we can have the policy debate about whether the Democratic Party needs to move further to the left or more to the middle to try and embrace these working class voters. But there's one thing that's absolutely clear. The leadership of the Democratic Party has abjectly failed for the last 8 years, the better part of a decade. If they want to see any type of different results in the future, they have to start making these changes. One thing comes before the other. Again, it's a good start, but it's certainly not the entire conversation like you just mentioned.
Time for Yeas and Nays, where we give our opinions on the news of the week. Sometimes we'll agree, other times we'll disagree.
Matt Gaetz's political career is at a dead end.
This is easy. That's obviously yes. You're smiling.
Well, because, Matt Gaetz, technically, even though he's withdrawing his nomination for Attorney General, yes, he resigned for the former Congress, but he legally cannot resign the seat that he was just reelected to until the new Congress begins on January 3rd. So that he would have to resign that seat separately in order to not be a part of Congress. So regardless of whether or not he does decide to resign that seat, there is still an open Senate vacancy in the state of Florida with Marco Rubio, right? And Donald Trump knows that he has the fate of Ron DeSantis' future career in his hands, because DeSantis, his term as Florida governor is done in 26, and DeSantis would make an incredible attorney general after that point. And we all know cabinet officials in Trump world, usually 2 years is like the maximum. If he wants a future, if he wants to be J.D. Vance's running mate, he has every interest in appeasing Trump. But I think regardless, Matt Gaetz is super young. He's 42 years old. He is genuinely talented on television in a way that lots of people who are loud are not. We often mistake just the loudest voice in the room for the most compelling, but Gaetz actually is. I think he has the political chops to turn this into something else that isn't just going to be, a dead-end radio show after one more lame duck session in Congress.
Matt Gaetz's career is effectively done, let's be honest. He's not going to go through the nomination process for AG because of this big House ethics report. He might be appointed to the Florida Senate seat that's vacated by Marco Rubio when he's heading off to state, but he's not going to win another election. Again, he pulled himself out of the confirmation process because of this scandal involving pay for sex with an underage girl. That's just not going to go away. Whether Democrats leaked it out now before he went through this confirmation process or down the line in 2030 when he's running for Senate again, he's not going to win another national election. I think he shot himself in the foot. And unfortunately, it kind of takes a long time for all that filler and Botox in your face to dissolve. At least I've been told. I don't know.
Okay. It's important to let it settle.
Sanctuary cities will succeed in #resisting Trump's deportation agenda.
I'm going to say yes on this one. Why do you think no?
Because we saw specifically the biggest swings for Donald Trump. It was not his base in this election. It was cities, urban voters, and specifically Latino men and black men, right? That's where you saw these 20-point shifts where Trump performed better in New York City than any Republican in a quarter century at least. That means that there is a mandate to reverse these policies. And as we've explored, it's a combination of local and federal funding, right? Where Jose Ibarra was living in the Roosevelt Hotel, technically that was New York City bankrolling the sanctuary, but it was the Biden administration that authorized the federal taxpayer funding for his flight, a humanitarian flight from New York down to Athens, Georgia. So I think that even if these are local policies, the federal government will be tying up the purse strings to make sure, you're not going to get this FEMA funding for illegal immigrant resettlement that we've had for the last 4 years under Biden. And also, the voters themselves understand now that this is not the ethical and, empathetic policy.
Tiana, I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think we're sort of missing the forest for the trees here a little bit. The question was, will these sanctuary cities be able to resist Donald Trump? The obvious answer is yes, because they've been doing it.
In terms of Boston's policy, there's a prohibition on resources and personnel going to enforce civil immigration detainers, meaning Boston Police and other departments cannot cooperate with ICE when it comes to detaining on civil warrants.
They did it during his first term in office. They resisted like you mentioned, something like 1.3 million deportation orders which were already on the books during the Biden administration. There is a will in these municipalities, at least from the leadership, not necessarily the voters, to continue pursuing these policies. Now, it's a totally different question if we were to say down the line, okay, if you don't comply with ICE, you're going to lose federal funding for X, Y, and Z program. That's a totally different story. The answer right now is yes, they will continue to resist. They are already resisting. The onus is on the Trump administration to come in and change the status quo now. Now it's time for us to fill in the blank.
The real story undergirding the Capitol bathroom debate is blank.
The real story is Nancy Mace's constant quest for fame, I think, right?
You're not wrong.
This is a difficult issue because there's a lot of people who feel all types of different ways when it comes to transgender politics. But let's look at who Nancy Mace is as a lawmaker, right? Back in 2022, Nancy Mace was one of just a few Republicans who voted for the marriage equality bill that was passed and then signed into the law by Joe Biden. Now, all of a sudden, after an election, she's coming out in a time right after she has alienated herself from MAGA voters, even though she endorsed in this cycle.
Donald Trump stood up to China before, and he will do it again.
This is twofold. One, this is Nancy Mace trying to save her own skin, and two, it's trying to get booked on Fox News. I really don't think that this is a serious political move from someone who we can at this point probably say with certainty isn't a serious lawmaker.
So come at me, bro.
The issue is that unlike with the gay marriage argument, where there was no slippery slope, gay folks just got married and had kids and are still living normal lives like you and me, the transgender activists did take their fight too far, right? Normal trans folks, I think, just want to live their own lives. Instead, the transgender activist class, which is different than just the regular body politic, they did fight to have biological boys compete in girls' sports in violation of Title IX. They did fight to allow biological men in women's prisons and women's shelters. They did focus on children and having the access to chemically castrate your child and have them change their pronouns without the parents' consent. And that is radical. And I think that without that overreach, most people were fine. If you remember the bathroom bill debate from like a decade ago, Nikki Haley did not sign a bathroom bill into law, and she is a conservative Republican lawmaker. But Nancy Mace is not wrong that the ordinary American does feel a massive backlash to this, because I think most of us have been made to care about it. And again, I have issue with the manner of how this happened, and I don't know how much this helps anyone other than Nancy Mace's own, social media metrics. But the reality is that the slippery slope in this case, the social conservatives were not wrong. And on to our last laugh, where we discuss the lighter items of the week. Okay, the thing that I love about this photo of RFK Jr. with the McDonald's is that, 48 hours before, he was trashing Trump's diet on a podcast.
The stuff that he eats is really bad. It's not, campaign food is always bad, but the food that goes onto that airplane is just poison.
And Donald Trump, say what you will about him, but he's the boss. And he reminds people, I made you.
Oh yeah, there's two things that came to mind. When you look at RFK's faces, the memory bank of memes comes forward.
This is fine.
I've made a huge mistake.
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
It's just good comedy, and again, I think he might be wondering if he made the right decision. Let's be honest, he had a pretty cush life. He was a Kennedy. He did whatever he wanted. He was freaking jacked. Is this really how he wants to be spending his 60s and his 70s? I don't know. I'm not so sure.
Joe Biden also clearly has his time and attention and focus on all the right things, looking not at all like he's just wandering into the Amazon rainforest at the G20, where it's pretty clear that, the rest of the leaders are like, okay, Grandpa, it's time for you to go home. Very nice to see you.
It's sad, let's be honest.
It is sad. Now that the election's over, it's just sad. There's no political element. It's just depressing.
It is. Biden's on the way out. For the record, he was the first sitting president to ever visit the Amazon. I would have potentially recommended a different shirt than the one he wore. But look, this guy's political career is over. Say what we want about Matt Gaetz. We know Joe Biden's definitely not getting elected to another office again. And this is on the world stage. Biden talked a whole lot about resetting U.S. relationships with our foreign allies. It's kind of sad that they didn't even tell him that the G20 family photo is taking place. He shows up late. He's not in the portrait. Yeah, I mean, they had to redo it just to get Joe in there on time. Anyway, that's all the time we've got for this week. Let us know in the comments if you think Tiana or I won this week's clash. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and go read more of our reporting at washingtonexaminer.com. I'm Christian Datoc.
I'm Tiana Lowe Doescher.
We'll see you next week.